everybody hear me? Whoa, whoa, step back. Hello? Check, that better? Okay.
All right. Hey, welcome to Nervous System Notes Part 4C. We left off in our last session talking about the frontal lobe, central sulcus, Broca's areas, prefrontal cortex, the olfactory bulbs, and I need to touch up on a few more things before we go any further, just so we're 100% clear on frontal lobe stuff. So without waiting, let's go a little bit further. All right, so one thing I wanted to cover with you is called Broca's aphasia, because a lot of things that go on in the brain, a lot of what we know about what happens in the brain, we only know because there are certain things that go wrong. So when patients or individuals or people in general typically have problems with a certain task, function, or anything like that, we can analyze what goes on in that, and then we can figure out what goes on in the brain based on the problems that occur. One of the things that I find, one of the most interesting things that I find is called Broca's aphasia. You'll notice that a lot of these areas or cortical regions will have a name, but then they also will have a disorder attached to them. So Broca's aphasia is damage to an area which causes difficulty speaking, even though the patient knows exact words to use, and the patient talks just using all wrong words or simply just makes sounds. So basically what happens is, as I'm talking to you, if you had Broca's aphasia, you could understand everything I'm saying, and you would know what you should say back, but you lack the 100% ability to make the right words or make words at all. So here's an example of that right here.
However, we shall see how effective this patient is at manipulating his intonation of this utterance. The segments you will see are, first, a conversation about his upcoming move to a new house, followed next by a sample of his spontaneous automatic speech.
Now tell me, why is it that you're moving, actually?
Tunnel, 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 tunnel. Tunnel, 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 tunnel. Tunnel, 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 tunnel. Tunnel, 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 tunnel. Tunnel, 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 tunnel.
So as you can see, it appears as though he has 100% comprehension of what she's asking, what he wants to say, but the words just don't come out. They come out as sounds.
Is it because the kids have grown and the house is getting too big, or
Tunnel, 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 tunnel.
ready for a smaller place?
Tunnel.
Seems reasonable. Less to keep up.
Tunnel, tunnel, tunnel.
Yeah.
Tunnel, 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 tunnel. Tunnel. Tunnel, 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 tunnel.
Now, all your children are grown, right?
Tunnel, tunnel,
How many children do you have?
tunnel, tunnel, tunnel,
Can you count that out for me?
tunnel, 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 tunnel. Don't tunnel, 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 tunnel.
All right, well,
Tunnel, tunnel, tunnel.
what number is this?
Tunnel.
Right? Right. Now let's count it out.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Nice, nice. Well, since you did 4 so well, let's go for broke. Let's go up to 20 if you can.
What's up? 1, 2.
So I'd imagine the second part of this video, even though I couldn't find the meaning behind it, was a little bit of time after he had had some speech therapy.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 12, 1, 2, tunnel, 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 tunnel.
Okay, 1.
So that's Broca's aphasia. So that's that small area right here in the frontal lobe can affect the ability to simply create words, even though you already know what they are supposed to be. So another portion of the frontal lobe that we didn't get to go into the last video just because I didn't want to make it too long was on the gustatory cortex. The gustatory cortex is simply in charge of receiving taste sensations. It's located deep and superior, the lateral fissure and the frontal lobe. Basically, you cannot see the gustatory cortex from the most superficial regions of the frontal lobe. So what you actually have to do is you have to pull the frontal lobe from the temporal lobe down that lateral fissure or lateral sulcus, and it basically extends from the underneath side of that into the insula. So if you look right here, the gustatory cortex would be this purple area right here that's underneath between the lateral fissure as part of the insula right there. Things that the gustatory cortex does for you, it associates the taste sensation of sweet, bitter, sour, salty, and what is called umami, which we'll learn about that when we go into sensations themselves. In addition to the strength of the sensation, so it detects it and how strong it is. This is like the difference between having a lemon versus having a warhead. They're both sour, but one is just definitely more intense. The neural pathway for this, which I think is very interesting, is there's actually several neural pathways for taste. Everybody always just associates taste simply with the tongue, but believe it or not, there's a couple of nerves that are involved in that. Excuse me. And before they actually are routed to the brain, they're actually routed straight to the medulla, into the thalamus, and then to the gustatory cortex. But you also have to think about the fact that from there it can be routed even further because of a lot of, even just you think about memories of the taste sensation and memory associated with that, it's rather strong, so it has to be routed to another place. So if you look at this picture here, you'll notice that you have a couple different nerves. You have the glossopharyngeal nerve, you have the vagus nerve, you have the facial nerve, and all of those things are routed to the medulla, which are then routed to the thalamus, and then from there they are routed to the gustatory cortex of the frontal lobe. So now we're getting into the second lobe that we have, second of four lobes that we're going to talk about. We're going to get into the parietal lobe now. The parietal lobe of the brain is located deep underneath the parietal bone. Again, clever name structure. Deep of the parietal bone of the skull. It extends between the central sulcus and the parietal occipital sulcus, and what it does is it plays a major role in senses and the integration of senses. What this means is any sensory information that is perceived by any kind of receptor that gets routed to the brain comes to the parietal lobe, and it actually processes or thinks about that that sensation. It's also in charge of your spatial awareness and your perception of your body within its three-dimensional space. This is called proprioception. It's awareness of your body and parts in space in relation to one another. For example, my phone's right here. The ability to know that my phone's right here and that proprioception in relation to where my phone is and my body's position to it is all done in the parietal lobe. So if you're looking at the brain here, this is a very magnified version. You'll notice everything in green here is the parietal lobe. And just as a refresher, let's go over this. This would be your central sulcus. Very important. You have the lateral fissure or lateral sulcus that runs right here. And then right about here would be where your parietal occipital sulcus is going to be located. All right, so I wanted to kind of go over some of those things that the parietal lobe does for you, and I found this video that basically kind of shows an example of body spatial awareness and how that actually is a learned or progressively learned item as you grow and develop into maturity, especially in adolescent age. Imagine being a toddler or something like that and completing this task. What this guy is, he's an occupational therapist that's helping kids with their spatial awareness. So I need you to think about this. I need you to think about your awareness of your body, balance, posture, where it's located, where your arm is, where your legs are, taking steps, being able to visually comprehend everything that's coming in here and complete this task. I know high school kids that can't do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over the parietal lobe and what are called the cortical regions of the parietal lobe. Again, let's refresh. The cerebral cortex is that rind around the outside of the brain that's composed of gray matters, and there's certain regions or areas of the cerebral cortex that are actually going to be super important to completing several different types of tasks. So let's get into those real quick. The first and foremost thing that you need to know about is the primary sensory cortex. Just like the primary motor cortex is in the frontal lobe, the primary sensory cortex is in the parietal lobe. It is located on the posterior side of the central sulcus, and it consists of the entire postcentral gyrus. Remember, when we were talking about the frontal lobe and the primary motor cortex, it was anterior to the central sulcus and consisted of the precentral gyrus. The primary sensory cortex is on the back side of the central sulcus and consists of the postcentral gyrus. So if we're going to go through this real quick, there's that central sulcus again, that yellow line that extends up through the middle of the brain. It starts at the temporal lobe right down in here and extends its way up here. Then you have, right on the posterior side of that, you have the postcentral gyrus. And then the postcentral gyrus consists of the primary motor cortex. What goes on here? This is the site involved with processing of tactile and proprioceptive information involved with touch, pressure, pain, and temperature. What I need you to understand here, yes, these are all sensations or senses that you have: touch, pressure, pain, and temperature. But what I also need you to pay attention to is the fact that you don't see things like sight, sound, taste. None of those are there. Or smell. Because these are just the ones involved with the tactile and proprioception information within your body and its body's position. And what happens is that sensory information that comes in from your entire body is relayed from the thalamus, which we'll get into where the thalamus is in a little bit later, to the exact appropriate site of primary sensory cortex. We'll get into this here in just a second. But what you'll understand is, if this is your primary sensory cortex, remember back when we were talking about the homunculus of the primary motor cortex, you have the same thing for the primary sensory cortex. It's also called the somatosensory cortex. But if you notice, you have your left and your right sides of your body. So this little primary sensory cortex would be in charge of bringing in the sensory information from the left side of your body, and on the right-hand side, and then the right side of the body would be on the left side of the brain here. And if you notice, it's specifically organized in a very exact pattern. And I'm going to want you to think about how that exact pattern and why there are an exaggeration of some of these body structures in terms of size along the homunculus, as you see right here as it goes down, and all the way around to where the temporal lobe would be located. So if we go back to this slide here, some big things that are part of the parietal lobe that you actually can do is, or that you actually can see or have to know where they're at, is you have the portion of your brain which would be involved in handwriting. And from what I understand, this can actually switch sides based on the fact whether you're right-handed or you're left-handed, because it is a learned task. You also have the analysis by touch. These two tasks right here would also be involved with the primary motor cortex in coordinating those activities. And then you have your spatial and visual analysis section of your parietal lobe, which would be the back right-hand side. So let's talk about the somatic sensory association there. You have the primary sensory cortex, and then posterior to that, you actually have the somatic sensory association area. What this does is it's actually located posterior to the postcentral gyrus and extends to the parietal occipital sulcus. So if we're going through this again, there's your primary sensory cortex. There's your somatic sensory association area. What this area does is basically assist with the integration and interpretation of sensations that are relative to body position orientation. And it may assist with some visual motor coordination, but the plain and simple fact is it takes any sensory information and interprets it and makes it make sense to you in terms of the position and orientation of your body within a certain amount of space. It allows you to identify certain familiar objects by touch. So the fact that you have the ability to close your eyes and pick up anything in the room, like my cell phone again, pick it up and feel it. You don't have your eyes open, you can't see it, so you don't have that visual stimulation there, but the fact that I can coordinate and move it around in my hand, I can actually see and feel that it is my cell phone. It allows you to understand three-dimensional relationships. The fact that things have a place in 3 dimension. So you can actually see, this is like your depth perception. For example, I can tell that this pencil in relation to you is in front of my cell phone, and then I can switch them up. That change in the 3-dimensional relationships is done and made sense of by the somatic sensory association area. I know some of this is cut off at the bottom, but it is also only involved with the sensation on the previous slide. Again, I got to reiterate this. There are specific cerebral cortex areas that are involved for sight, smell, etc. They have their own association areas. These are the ones that are only involved with touch, pressure, pain, and temperature changes. And that's where we're going to stop. So that was the parietal lobe. So interesting. If you have any questions, please let me know.